Room 307 at St. Clara's Hospital was a place time seemed to have forgotten. The once pristine white walls now had a yellowish tinge of neglect. The only constant sound was the rhythmic beep of machines, a monotonous symphony marking endless days and nights. There, lying on a bed that had long since molded to his motionless body, was John. His hair, once brown and full of life, now gray strands scattered across the pillow. The stubble on his face gave him a neglected look, as if even his body had given up on keeping appearances. It had been 5 years. 5 long years since that fateful night when John's world came crashing down, literally. A car accident, a violent crash, and then, silence. The coma that doctors said was irreversible. But for Mary, his wife, each day was a new battle against hopelessness. She came every day, without fail. She'd sit in the worn chair beside the bed, take John's cold hand in hers, and talk. She'd talk about everything and nothing. "John, love, you won't believe what little Peter got up to at school today." Her voice, though tired, still carried a touch of tenderness. It was as if, through words, she was trying to build a bridge across the chasm separating them. The nurses on the floor knew Mary well. Some, the older ones, remembered how she used to come in the first few months, eyes red from crying, hands trembling as she clutched photos and John's personal belongings. Now, years later, desperation had given way to a quiet determination. On that autumn afternoon, as golden leaves danced outside the window, something changed. Mary, as always, sat beside John. But today, instead of talking about day-to-day life, she began to sing. It was a simple melody, a lullaby she used to sing to their son when he was a baby. Her voice, soft and a bit off-key, filled the room. And that's when it happened. An almost imperceptible movement. John's fingers, those same fingers that hadn't moved in years, twitched slightly. Mary stopped singing, her heart pounding furiously. Had it just been her imagination? "John," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "John, can you hear me?" The silence that followed was deafening. But something had changed. A spark of hope, long dormant, began to glow again in Mary's heart. Mary barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw John's fingers moving. Had it been real? Or was her desperate wish for a miracle playing tricks on her mind? The next morning, she arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. Dr. Richards, the physician responsible for John for years, met her in the hallway. "Mary, everything okay?" "You seem agitated," he commented, concern evident in his voice. Mary hesitated. What if she told him and the doctor thought she was losing her mind? "Doctor, I think I saw John move yesterday," she finally confessed, the words tumbling out. "I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I saw his fingers move when I was singing." Dr. Richards frowned, more out of concern than skepticism. "Mary, you know that." "I know," she interrupted. "I know what everyone says. That it's impossible. But what if?" The doctor sighed, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Let's take a look at him, okay? Together." In the room, John looked the same as any other day. Motionless, oblivious to the world around him. Mary approached, holding his hand as she always did. "John, love, I'm here," she said softly. And then, to Dr. Richard's surprise, she began to sing. The same lullaby from the day before. The first verses passed without anything happening. Mary sang, her voice trembling slightly, while the doctor watched, torn between compassion and skepticism. It was during the chorus that it happened. John's fingers contracted. It wasn't just a spasm this time. It was a clear movement, as if he was trying to squeeze Mary's hand. "My God," exclaimed Dr. Richards, rushing to the bedside. John? John, can you hear me? Mary kept singing, tears streaming down her face. John's hand squeezed hers harder. And then, slowly, as if emerging from the depths of an ocean, John opened his eyes. It was only for a few seconds. A confused blink before they closed again. But it was enough. Call the team. Dr. Richards shouted to a passing nurse. Quickly! The room soon filled with doctors and nurses, all talking at once, checking monitors and running tests. Mary was gently moved away from the bed, but she refused to leave the room. She stood in a corner, trembling hands covering her mouth, watching the surreal scene unfold. Hours later, when the commotion finally died down, Dr. Richards approached her, a tired but genuine smile on his face. Mary, he said, almost disbelieving his own words, it looks like we have a miracle on our hands. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Mary. John was awake, yes, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. We need to be realistic, Dr. Richards explained in a meeting with Mary and the family. John spent 5 years in a coma. His body and mind will need time to readjust. Mary listened, squeezing the hand of her daughter, Beth, now 15 years old. The girl barely remembered her father before the accident. Will he recognize me? Beth asked, her voice choked. The doctor smiled gently. Each case is unique, dear. But we'll do everything to help your dad reconnect with you all. In the room, John spent most of his time sleeping. When awake, his eyes wandered around the environment, as if trying to understand where he was. Speech hadn't returned yet, and movements were limited. Mary divided her time between the hospital and home, taking care of Beth and little Peter, 7 years old, who was born a few months after the accident. It was an exhausting routine, but she felt renewed by hope. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when John seemed more confused than usual, Mary decided to try something different. She took her phone out of her pocket and started showing him photos. Look, John. Remember this day? Our honeymoon in Hawaii. John blinked, his eyes focusing on the screen. And this one? Beth's first birthday. You insisted on baking the cake yourself. It was a disaster, but we ate it all, laughing. For a moment, Mary swore she saw a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. Encouraged, she continued. Oh, and this is Peter. Our little one. He was born after you. Her voice faltered. John turned his face to her, and for the first time since he woke up, he shakily raised his hand, touching Mary's face. The tears came instantly. John, are you there, my love? He opened his mouth as if to speak. No sound came out, but his lips formed a word that Mary immediately recognized: love. Mary sobbed, carefully hugging John. I'm here, honey. We're all here for you. That night, returning home, Mary felt lighter than she had in years. As she entered, she found Beth helping Peter with his homework. How's Dad? Beth asked anxiously. Mary smiled, tears in her eyes. He's coming back to us, honey. Bit by bit, but he is. Peter, who knew his father only through photos and stories, innocently asked, Mom, when can Dad play ball with me? Mary's heart tightened, but she kept smiling. One day at a time, my love. But you know what? I think your dad would love to hear you talk about your games. How about we visit him tomorrow? Peter's eyes lit up. Can I bring my new ball? Of course you can, Mary replied, ruffling her son's hair. As she prepared dinner, with the familiar sounds of the children arguing good-naturedly in the living room, Mary allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to dream of a future where her family would be complete again. The day of the children's visit arrived, bringing with it a mix of anxiety and hope. Mary spent the morning preparing John, telling him about the kids coming, even without knowing for sure how much he understood. "Remember Bethany, honey? Our little girl. Well, not so little now. She's a young lady. And little Peter. Oh, you'll love meeting him." John looked at her with an expression that oscillated between confusion and curiosity. His eyes, once empty, now seemed to be searching for something in Mary's words. When Bethany entered the room, there was a moment of hesitation. The teenager stopped at the door, her wide eyes fixed on the father she barely recognized. "Dad," she called, her voice trembling. John turned his head towards the voice. His eyes widened, and for an instant, Mary saw a flash of the old John, the proud father who used to look at his daughter as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Bethany approached slowly, holding her father's hand. "It's me, Dad. Beth." John squeezed her hand weakly, his lips moving without emitting sound. But his eyes, oh, his eyes said it all. Tears began to stream down John's face. It was at this moment that Peter, unable to contain his childish energy, burst into the room. "Daddy, look at my new ball." The little one ran to the bed, almost tripping over his own feet. Mary made a move to hold him, fearing he might be too rough, but stopped when she saw John's reaction. A sound. Hoarse, almost inaudible, but definitely a sound came from John's throat. It seemed like a laugh. Peter, oblivious to the importance of the moment, continued chattering. "I'm going to be a soccer player, Daddy. Just like you were." John looked at Mary, confusion in his eyes. She hurried to explain. "I told him about how you used to play on weekends, remember? With your work buddies." Something seemed to light up in John's mind. He made a visible effort and, to everyone's amazement, managed to articulate a word: goal. The room exploded with emotion. Bethany hugged her father, crying. Peter jumped for joy, shouting he spoke. He spoke. Mary, feeling weak in the knees, leaned against the wall, tears flowing freely. Dr. Richards, drawn by the commotion, came running into the room. Seeing the scene, a broad smile spread across his face. "Well, looks like we have a big breakthrough here," he exclaimed, approaching to examine John. As the doctor asked questions and ran quick tests, Mary watched the scene, her heart overflowing with emotion. John still had a long way to go, she knew that. But at that moment, seeing her children interacting with their father, hearing his voice, even if weak, for the first time in years, she felt a deep certainty they would overcome this. Together, as a family. That night, as she put the children to bed, both talked animatedly about the visit. "Mom, do you think Dad will be able to come home soon?" Bethany asked, hope shining in her eyes. Mary smiled, caressing her daughter's face. "One step at a time, dear. But today was a big step." The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster for the Silva family. John made daily progress, but each advance came with new challenges. Physiotherapy was particularly difficult. Years of inactivity had considerably weakened John's muscles. Watching him struggle to perform simple tasks, like holding a spoon or sitting up in bed, broke Mary's heart. "Can't do it," John muttered one day, frustration evident in his still hoarse voice, after a particularly exhausting session. Mary, sitting beside him, held his hand. "Hey, look at me," she said softly. "Remember that time you decided to renovate the bathroom by yourself? You spent a month cursing at tiles, but you didn't give up. This is just another bathroom for you to renovate, okay?" John stared at her for a moment, then, to Mary's surprise, let out a weak laugh. "You never let me forget that. This was how it was now. Moments of lucidity and humor mixed with periods of confusion and frustration. But each word, each complete sentence, was a celebrated victory. At home, things were changing too. Bethany, once a rebellious teenager, now helped more with household chores and with Peter. The little one, in turn, spent hours drawing presents for Daddy. One night, as Mary was helping Peter get ready for bed, the boy asked a question that caught her off guard. "Mom, will Dad remember me when he comes home?" Mary felt a lump in her throat. "Of course he will, my love. He already knows you and adores you." "But he never saw me as a baby," Peter insisted, his big eyes full of concern. Mary pulled her son into a tight hug. "Daddy might not have memories of you as a baby, but he's creating new memories now. And you know what? I think these will be even more special." At the hospital, John began asking questions about the time he had lost. These were difficult conversations, full of emotion. 5 years, he asked one day, shock evident in his voice. Mary nodded, holding his hand. "Yes, love. But you're here now. That's what matters." John was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Then, with tears in his eyes, he said, "Tell me everything." And Mary did. About how Bethany had grown, about Peter's birth, about the challenges and joys. John listened attentively, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just silently absorbing. It was during one of these conversations that John made a request that surprised everyone. "I want to go home." Dr. Richards, who was present, exchanged a look with Mary. "John," he began carefully, "your recovery has been remarkable, but there's still a lot of work ahead." "Please," John insisted, his voice stronger than ever. "I need to be with my family." After much discussion and planning, it was decided that John could make a short visit home as part of his therapy. The day of the visit arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and nervousness. When the car stopped in front of the Silva house, John sat motionless for a moment, looking out the window. "Is everything okay?" Mary asked softly. John turned to her, tears in his eyes, but a smile on his face. "I'm home." As Mary helped him out of the car, the front door opened. Bethany and Peter came running out, their faces lit up with joy. "Daddy! Daddy!" they shouted in unison. And at that moment, surrounded by the love of his family, John knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had everything he needed to face them. John's visit to the family home was an important milestone in his recovery, but it also brought to light new challenges and emotions that no one was fully prepared to face. As he entered the living room, John froze for a moment. His eyes scanned the environment, absorbing every detail. The walls, once beige, were now a soft shade of blue. New photos decorated the shelves, moments he had missed. "Everything changed," he murmured, his voice a mixture of awe and sadness. Mary, holding his arm for support, felt a tug at her heart. "Some things have changed, yes. But the most important thing remains the same, John. Us. Our family." Peter, unable to contain his excitement, pulled at his father's sleeve. "Come see my room, Dad. I have so much to show you." John smiled, allowing himself to be guided by his son. Peter's room was a whirlwind of colors and toys. On the walls, drawings of a family of 4, always with the father included, even though he had never been there before. "You drew me," John said, emotional. Peter nodded energetically. "Of course. You were always here, Dad. Just sleeping at the hospital." The simplicity and purity of Peter's explanation hit John like a wave. He knelt down, with some difficulty, and hugged his son, tears silently streaming down his face. Bethany, who was watching from the door, joined the hug. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, with father and children reconnecting in a way that words couldn't express. The rest of the visit was an emotional roller coaster. John tired easily, needing frequent breaks. There were moments of confusion when names or events escaped him, causing visible frustration. During dinner, lovingly prepared by Mary and Bethany, John struggled to use the cutlery, his hands still shaky and clumsy. "Let me help you, Dad," Bethany gently offered, moving to cut the food for him. John shook his head, determination in his eyes. "No. I can do it." The meal was slow, with John taking frequent breaks to rest. But each successful forkful was a small victory, silently celebrated by everyone at the table. As the night wore on, John's fatigue became more evident. Mary realized it was time to end the visit. "I think we need to head back to the hospital, love," she said softly. The disappointment in the children's eyes was palpable. "Already?" Peter whined. John, although visibly exhausted, seemed reluctant to go. "Can I stay a bit longer?" It was Bethany who surprised everyone with her maturity. "Dad," she said, holding his hand, "you need to rest to get strong. That way, next time, you can stay longer." John looked at his daughter, a mix of pride and admiration in his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" Bethany smiled, tears in her eyes. "I learned from the best," she said, looking at Mary. The goodbye was emotional, with promises of more visits soon. As Mary helped John into the car, he paused, looking at the house one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice laden with emotion. Mary kissed his forehead. "For what, love?" "For keeping our family together. For not giving up." On the way back to the hospital, John was quiet, processing everything he had experienced. Mary respected his space, understanding that he needed this moment. When they arrived, Dr. Richards was waiting for them, eager to know how the visit had gone. "It was perfect," John said, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "Doctor, when can I go home, for good?" The doctor smiled. "We'll work on that, John. One step at a time, remember." That night, lying in his hospital bed, John fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of the day he would finally return home, to his family, for good. The days following John's visit home were marked by renewed determination. He attacked his physiotherapy sessions with a vigor that surprised even the most experienced therapists. "Need to get strong," he would say between labored breaths as he struggled to take another step on the parallel bars. Mary, who watched it all with a mix of pride and concern, couldn't help but marvel at her husband's willpower. But she also noticed the moments when frustration took over, when John's body didn't respond as quickly as he would like. It was on one of these afternoons, after a particularly difficult session, that John faced one of his greatest emotional challenges. "Can't do it," he mumbled, tears of frustration streaming down his face. "Never going to be the same." Mary knelt beside the wheelchair, holding his hands. "Hey, look at me," she said softly. "You're right. You won't be the same. You'll be even better." John stared at her, confused. "How can you say that?" Mary smiled, tears in her own eyes. "Because the John the first knew was amazing. But this John here, who fights every day, who doesn't give up even when it's hard. This John is a hero." Mary's words seemed to touch something deep in John. He was silent for a moment, processing what she had said. Then, with visible effort, he leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for being my strength," he whispered. Meanwhile, at home, Bethany and Peter were also facing their own challenges. The teenager, now with additional responsibilities, sometimes felt overwhelmed. One night, Mary found Bethany crying silently in her room. "Honey, what's wrong?" Mary asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Bethany hesitated before answering. I miss how things were before. And then I feel guilty for thinking that way." Mary pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "There's nothing wrong with feeling homesick, Beth. We all do. But you know what? We're creating a new normal. And you've been amazing in this process." Mary's words seemed to lift a weight off Bethany's shoulders. The girl smiled shyly. "Do you think Dad would be proud of me?" "I'm sure he would," Mary replied, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Peter, in turn, faced challenges at school. Some classmates, not fully understanding the situation, asked insensitive questions about his father. One day, Peter came home looking downcast. When Mary asked what had happened, he burst into tears. "A boy at school said my dad is a zombie," he sobbed. "That he'll never be normal again." Mary's heart broke seeing her son's pain. She pulled him onto her lap, gently rocking him. "Peter, my love, your dad isn't a zombie. He's a fighter. And you know what? He's fighting to come back to us, to you. Doesn't that make him a hero?" Peter's eyes lit up at this perspective. "My dad is a superhero?" Mary laughed softly. "Yes, he is. And do you know what superheroes need most?" "What?" Peter asked, curious. "People who believe in them. Do you believe in your dad?" Peter nodded vigorously. "Yes. I believe in him." At the hospital, John continued his daily battle. Every small progress was celebrated. The first step without support, the first time he managed to dress himself, the day he finally uttered a complete sentence without hesitation. One afternoon, during a family visit, John surprised everyone. "Want to tell a story," he announced. Everyone gathered around his bed, eager. John began to narrate, his voice gaining strength as he progressed, a story about a warrior who fell into a deep sleep and woke up in a new world, but with the love of his family to guide him. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Mary, emotional, realized that John wasn't just telling a story, he was processing his own journey, finding meaning in his struggle. That night, as the family said goodbye, John made an announcement. Dr. Richards said, "I can go home in 2 weeks, if I keep progressing." The news was met with shouts of joy and emotional hugs. As Mary watched the scene, her heart overflowed with love and gratitude. They still had a long road ahead, but together, as a family, they would face any obstacle. The 2 weeks leading up to John's return home passed in the blink of an eye and, at the same time, seemed like an eternity. The Silva family was in a flurry, preparing everything to welcome him. Mary spent days reorganizing the house, making it more accessible. Furniture was moved, rugs removed, and a hospital bed was installed in the couple's bedroom. Bethany and Peter took turns decorating, hanging "Welcome Home, Dad" banners everywhere. On the eve of the big day, Mary found Peter sitting on his father's bed, hugging the pillow. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting beside him. Peter looked up, a mixture of anxiety and hope in his gaze. "What if Dad doesn't like me, Mom? What if he prefers how it was before, without me?" Mary's heart clenched. She pulled her son into a tight hug. "Peter, listen carefully. Your father already loves you more than you can imagine. Every time we talk about you, his eyes light up. You're not an intruder, honey. You're the missing piece in our family." The words seemed to calm the boy, who fell asleep in his mother's arms, dreaming of the next day. When the big day finally arrived, the Silva house was unrecognizable. Colorful balloons decorated the entrance, and the smell of freshly baked cake filled the air. The car parked in front of the house, and Mary helped John out. He was using a cane, his steps still hesitant, but there was determination in his eyes. As they approached the door, it suddenly opened. Bethany and Peter came running out, almost knocking John over in the process. "Easy, kids," Mary warned, laughing. "Let's give Dad some space to come in." John smiled, tears in his eyes. "It's all right," he said, his voice firmer than ever. "Come here." He opened his arms, and the children hugged him carefully. For a moment, they stood there, at the entrance of the house, a family finally reunited. Upon entering, John paused, looking around. The house was different from his last visit. More welcoming, more home. "Welcome back, love," Mary whispered, kissing his cheek. The day was full of precious little moments. John sitting at the dinner table with the family, savoring the home-cooked food he had missed so much. Peter proudly showing his latest drawings. Bethany playing guitar, a skill she had developed in recent years. But not everything was easy. John tired quickly and sometimes became frustrated with his limitations. There was a tense moment when he dropped a glass of water, his hand still not entirely steady. "Damn it," he exclaimed, frustration evident in his voice. Before Mary could react, Peter was already there with a cloth, cleaning up the mess. "No problem, Dad," he said casually. "It happens." The simplicity and acceptance in his son's voice seemed to calm John. He ruffled Peter's hair, a grateful smile on his face. At night, when the children were already in bed, John and Mary sat on the porch, looking at the stars. It was something they used to do before the accident, and resuming this habit brought a sense of normalcy. "How are you feeling?" Mary asked, holding his hand. John was silent for a moment, reflecting. "Grateful," he finally answered. "Scared." "Happy." All at the same time. Mary nodded, understanding perfectly. "It will take time for us to adjust. But we're in this together." John turned to her, his eyes shining with emotion. "You know, I love you, right?" "More than ever." Mary felt the tears coming. "I love you too, John. Always." They stayed there, embracing under the stars, knowing that the path ahead would still be full of challenges. But now, finally reunited as a family, they felt they could face anything. Inside the house, Bethany, who couldn't sleep, overheard her parents' conversation. A smile formed on her face as she closed her eyes, feeling, for the first time in years, that everything would be all right. And so, the Silva family began a new chapter. A chapter of healing, rediscovery, and, above all, unconditional love. The weeks following John's return were a period of adjustment for the entire Silva family. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories that were celebrated with enthusiasm. One morning, Mary woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Intrigued, she got up to investigate. The scene she found melted her heart. John, still in his pajamas, was trying to make pancakes with Peter. The kitchen was a mess. There was flour everywhere, and the pancakes had strange shapes. But the smiles on father and son's faces were radiant. "Look, Mom," Peter exclaimed excitedly. "We're making breakfast." John looked at Mary, a mix of pride and embarrassment on his face. "Sorry about the mess," he said, his speech more fluid than ever. "We wanted to surprise you." Mary felt tears in her eyes. "It's the best surprise I could ask for," she replied, joining them in the kitchen. The pancakes were far from perfect, but for the Silva family, it was the best breakfast in years. As the days went by, John strived to resume his old responsibilities and create new connections, especially with Peter, whom he was still getting to know. One afternoon, John found Peter frustrated with his math homework. "Can I help?" John offered hesitantly. Peter looked at his father, surprised. "You know math, Dad?" John chuckled softly. "I was an engineer, remember? Math was my strong suit." In the minutes that followed, father and son pored over the math problems. John, who still struggled with some words, found that numbers came more easily. Peter, in turn, was amazed by his father's ability. "Wow, Dad, you're like a math superhero," Peter exclaimed. The innocent comment touched John deeply. He realized that even with his current limitations, he still had a lot to offer his children. Bethany, on the other hand, faced her own challenges. Accustomed to being the adult of the house in her father's absence, she now struggled to find her place. One night, John found her on the porch, looking pensively at the stars. "Everything okay, princess?" he asked, sitting beside her. Bethany hesitated before answering. "It's weird, you know, having you back. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy. But I don't know what my role is anymore." John was silent for a moment, processing his daughter's words. Then, gently, he took her hand. "Your role, Beth, is to be yourself. An incredible teenager who was too strong for too long. Now it's time for you to just be my daughter. Let me be the dad, okay?" John's words opened the floodgates. Bethany threw herself into her father's arms, sobbing. Years of repressed emotions finally found an outlet. John held her tightly, his own tears mingling with hers. "I'm here now," he whispered. "And I'm not going anywhere." Mary, who was watching the scene from the door, felt her heart fill with love and gratitude. Her family was healing, reconnecting. The challenges, of course, didn't disappear overnight. John still had bad days when frustration with his limitations left him irritable and depressed. There were moments when he got lost in his memories, confusing the past with the present. But for every difficult moment, there were dozens of precious ones. John learning to play video games with Peter, laughing at his own clumsy attempts. Bethany teaching her father to play a few notes on the guitar. Mary and John slow dancing in the living room, reminiscing about their first date. One evening, as the family watched a movie together, Mary looked around and was hit by a wave of emotion. John was asleep on the couch, Peter nestled on one side and Bethany on the other. The scene was so ordinary, so normal, and yet so extraordinary considering all they had been through. In that moment, Mary understood that the miracle wasn't just John waking up from the coma. The real miracle was the love that kept them together, that guided them through the darkest moments and now shone brighter than ever. John's recovery journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more adjustments to be made. But there, in that room, surrounded by the love of his family, John was already home. And for the Silva family, that was more than enough. A year had passed since John returned home. The Silva family's life had found a new rhythm, different from what it was before, but equally precious. On a sunny Saturday morning, John woke up early. He still had days when he felt confused upon waking, but today his mind was clear. Carefully, so as not to wake Mary, he got up and went to the window. The neighborhood was quiet, just beginning to wake up. John took a deep breath, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. Each day was a gift, a chance to rediscover the world and his family. He went down the stairs slowly, still needing to hold onto the railing. In the kitchen, to his surprise, he found Bethany. "Good morning, Dad," she smiled, stirring something in a pot. "I'm making that porridge you like." John felt his heart warm. "Thank you, Princess. But what are you doing up so early on a Saturday?" Bethany shrugged, but there was a gleam in her eyes. "I have a surprise for you. For the whole family, actually." Intrigued, John sat at the table, watching his daughter move around the kitchen with a confidence that reminded him so much of Mary. Gradually, the rest of the family woke up. Peter came down the stairs running, as always, almost tripping over his own feet. Mary appeared soon after, smiling at the familiar scene in the kitchen. As they had breakfast, Bethany finally revealed her surprise. I got accepted into college," she announced, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I'm going to study music and therapy." For a moment, there was silence. Then the kitchen exploded in celebrations. John stood up, hugging his daughter tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Beth," he said, tears in his eyes. So proud." Mary joined the hug, followed by Peter, who, even though he didn't fully understand what was happening, knew it was something good. Later that day, the family decided to have a picnic in the local park to celebrate. While packing things up, John picked up his old guitar. "Do you think I can still play?" he asked Mary, a bit unsure. She smiled, kissing him softly. "There's only one way to find out, isn't there?" At the park, under the shade of a large tree, the Silva family settled down. John, with the guitar on his lap, began to strum softly. The first notes came out hesitant, but soon he found the rhythm. To everyone's surprise, including his own, John began to sing. His voice, though a bit hoarse from disuse, still carried the same emotion from years ago. It was a song he used to sing to Mary when they were dating, a promise of eternal love. As he sang, John looked at his family. Mary, with tears in her eyes, humming along. Bethany, smiling and swaying gently to the rhythm of the music. And Peter, looking at his father with pure fascination. In that moment, John felt he had finally returned completely. He wasn't the same man as before the accident, but perhaps he was someone better. Someone who had learned the true value of life, family, and love. When the song ended, there was a moment of reverent silence. Then Peter jumped up, applauding enthusiastically. "Wow, Dad! You never told me you could sing," he exclaimed. John laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "I think I had forgotten myself, champ." The rest of the afternoon was spent between laughter, games, and more music. John watched his family, amazed at how much they had grown and changed. Bethany, about to start a new journey in college. Peter, each day more curious and full of life. And Mary, his rock, his safe harbor, stronger and more beautiful than ever. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the Silva family started packing up to head home. "Dad," Bethany called as they walked. Do you think Grandma would be proud of us?" John stopped, looking at the sky for a moment. The melody that had awakened him from the coma, his mother's song, echoed softly in his mind. "I'm sure she would, my love," he replied, pulling his daughter close. "She's watching over us, every day." As they walked back home, hand in hand, John reflected on the incredible journey they had taken. From the silence of the coma to the symphony of his current life. Every challenge, every tear, every moment of joy had brought them here. And although the future was still uncertain, with new challenges surely waiting, John knew they would face everything together. Because in the end, it was love, the love of his family, love for music, love for life, that brought him back. And it was that same love that would continue to guide them, no matter what lay ahead. That night, as the Silva family gathered in the living room, sharing stories and laughter, the melody that had once awakened John from his coma seemed to linger in the air, a constant reminder of the miracle they had lived and the promise of many happy days yet to come.